Hexagram 57, the gentle, the penetrating wind. Wind and wood is the kind of image of the fundamental three-line trigram that as the building block of this hexagram. This is one of 8 hexagrams that's made up of the same 3 lines at the bottom and the top. So it's a doubling of this one of the 8 fundamental elemental images. This idea of wind and wood, that which slowly, gradually, unobtrusively, unshockingly moves and gets into everything and slowly, slowly grows acorn to oak. So sun is one of the 8 double trigrams. It is the eldest daughter and symbolizes wind or wood. It has for its attribute gentleness, which nonetheless penetrates like the wind or like growing wood with its roots. The dark principle, in itself rigid and immovable, is dissolved by the penetrating light principle, to which it subordinates itself in gentleness. In nature, it is the wind that disperses the gathered clouds, leaving the sky clear and serene. In human life, it is penetrating clarity of judgment that thwarts all dark, hidden motives. In the life of the community, it is the powerful influence of a great personality that uncovers and breaks up those intrigues which shun the light of day. The judgment reads, the gentle, success through what is small. It furthers one to have somewhere to go. It furthers one to see the great man. Penetration produces gradual and inconspicuous effects. It should be effected not by an act of violation, but by influence that never lapses. Results of this kind are less striking to the eye than those won by surprise attack, but they are more enduring and more complete. If one would produce such effects, one must have a clearly defined goal, for only when the penetrating influence works always in the same direction can the object be attained. Small strength can achieve its purpose only by subordinating itself to an eminent person who is capable of creating order. The image reads, winds following one upon the other, the image of the gently penetrating. Thus the superior man spreads his commands abroad and carries out his undertakings. The penetrating quality of the wind depends upon its ceaselessness. This is what makes it so powerful. Time is its instrument. In the same way, the ruler's thought should penetrate the soul of the people. This too requires a lasting influence brought about by enlightenment and command. Only when the command has been assimilated by the people is action in accordance with it possible. Action without preparation of the ground only frightens and repels. And when we got this up in New Hampshire last week, that was the end of our reading because we had no changing lines. But here, the 5th line is changing, which means we're going to read the special commentary on the 5th line of this 6th line hexagram. Changing line in the 5th place means perseverance brings good fortune. Remorse vanishes. Nothing that does not further. No beginning but an end. Before the change, 3 days. After the change, 3 days. Good fortune. You know what? I think this is the literal. Wow. I think this may be the exact same hexagram because I did a private session for someone in the last couple of weeks. and I think they got this exact line, and I think they got the work on what has been spoiled also. This is super rare. To get the same hexagram inside of a couple weeks is almost unheard of. Perseverance brings good fortune, remorse vanishes. Nothing that does not further. No beginning but an end. Before the change, 3 days. After the change, 3 days. Good fortune. In the situation described in Ku, work on what has been spoiled. Yeah, because we got this, because this changing line, if it's the only one in the hexagram that changes, gets you to hexagram 18, which is what we're going to read next. And it references hexagram 18 here, which is also relatively unusual. So it's saying in the situation described in the next hexagram, work on what has been spoiled, an entirely new point of departure must be set up. Whereas here, it is only a question of reforms. The beginning has not been good, but the moment has been reached when a new direction can be taken. Change and improvement are called for. Such steps must be undertaken with steadfastness, that is, with a firm and correct attitude of mind. Then they will succeed, and remorse will disappear. But it must be remembered that such improvements require careful consideration. Before a change is made, it must be pondered over again and again. After the change is made, it is necessary to note carefully for some time after how the improvements bear the test of actuality. Such careful work is accompanied by good fortune. I'm just going to go right to the next hexagram, and then we can peel this apart a little more if we want. Unless anyone has any immediate thoughts or reflections here. So when you change the fifth line into its opposite, which happens when you get all heads or whole tails, all three heads or three tails, all yin or all yang, it's a changing line, which means you have a special read on it and you flip it into its opposite to get to develop a second hexagram out of the first situation. That gets us to this hexagram 18, work on what has been spoiled. The Chinese character Ku represents a bowl in whose contents worms are breeding. This means decay. It has come about because the gentle indifference of the lower trigram has come together with the rigid inertia of the upper, and the result is stagnation. Since this implies guilt, the conditions embody a demand for removal of the cause. Hence, the meaning of the hexagram is not simply what has been spoiled, but work on what has been spoiled. The judgment, work on what has been spoiled, has supreme success. It furthers one to cross the great water. Before the starting point, 3 days. After the starting point, 3 days. What has been spoiled through human's fault can be made good again through human's work. It is not immutable fate, as in the time of standstill, that has caused the state of corruption, but rather the abuse of human freedom. Work toward improving conditions promises well, because it accords with the possibilities of the time. We must not recoil from work and danger, symbolized by crossing of the great water, but must take hold energetically. Success depends, however, on proper deliberation. This is expressed by the lines before the starting point 3 days, after the starting point 3 days. We must first know the causes of corruption before we can do away with them. Hence, it is necessary to be cautious during the time before the start. Then we must see to it that the new way is safely entered upon, so that a relapse may be avoided. Therefore, we must pay attention to the time after the start. Decisiveness and energy must take the place of the inertia and indifference that have led to decay, in order that the ending may be followed by a new beginning. The image, the wind blows low on the mountain, the image of decay. Thus the superior man stirs up the people and strengthens their spirit. When the wind blows low on the mountain, it is thrown back and spoils the vegetation. This contains a challenge to improvement. It is the same with debasing attitudes and fashions. They corrupt human society. To do away with this corruption, the superior person must regenerate society. Their methods likewise must be derived from the two trigrams, but in such a way that their effects unfold in orderly sequence. The superior person must first remove stagnation by stirring up public opinion as the wind stirs everything, and must then strengthen and tranquilize the character of the people as the mountain gives tranquility and nourishment to all that grows in its vicinity. Pretty interesting read, really. The last part of this reading is the fifth line. That's what got us here. Setting right what has been spoiled by the Father, one meets with praise. An individual is confronted with corruption originating from neglect in former times. He lacks the power to ward it off alone, but with able helpers, he can at least bring about a thorough reform if he cannot create a new beginning, and this also is praiseworthy. Any thoughts, reflections, curiosities, questions? Strike me about this reading. I guess I'm interpreting this at least substantially against the background of current events in the USA over the last, weeks, months, years, depending how you want to slice it. And so I'm struck that in the face of what seems at some level so sort of elementally catastrophic or, potentially disruptive at scale, what this is talking about, the I Ching is no stranger to talk of revolutions and talk of, severe moments. I find it striking that this first hexagram is all about the softness and gentleness with which real change takes place. The whole language about, that real change happens kind of slowly and organically in a way, and like the sudden surprise attack, in a sense, kind of what we're living through right now at a certain level, could be seen at least. That gets more headlines, it generates more outrage, but it doesn't necessarily actually change or affect things in the way that sort of slow, gradual, gentle progress. And also, I'm all for getting riled up and revolutionary at a certain level, but there's something to be said, and this hexagram seems to be saying it, that there's something really to be said for just being grounded in our practice and doing the work slowly every day, not necessarily having to galvanize, a cataclysmic struggle of good against evil. That may not be the way to understand or navigate the time that we appear to be living in and will be continuing to live in. So that was one thing that struck me in this histogram, as it did the previous two times I've gotten this in the last 2 weeks. This idea of the winds following one upon the other, the image of the gently penetrating, thus the superior man spreads his commands abroad and carries out his undertakings. It's not a passive, situation. It's a getting to work thing, spreading one's commands abroad, carrying out our undertakings. This whole idea of time being the instrument of change, time is our ally in a way. It may take a long time, but time actually is how slow, gentle progress can make such an impact over a period of time. So it seems to be both encouraging that softness and gentleness and encouraging us to see how that can really create a meaningful and, in a way, more fundamentally lasting kind of influence versus the big revolutionary explosions um, that some kind of social movements seem to specialize in, including in a way kind of a little bit where we are. Um, and then this whole idea of so we get here in the fifth line and in the next hexagram this idea of waiting, at the beginning wait 3 days, before after the end wait 3 days, this idea of being really deliberate and cautious and thoughtful and not rushing into things, like doing the work to be clear on what is the direction, where are we going, how we're going to make this work. Let's pay really close attention to it after we try to put whatever kind of reforms or movements in place, because it's not just like quick decisions and then blasting through and good luck everybody. It's like really paying attention to the work in a very conscious way. And this whole idea of perseverance brings good fortune, remorse vanishes, nothing that would not further. I mean, those are pretty darn encouraging pronouncements. No beginning but an end. So anyway, so I thought those were some of the things that stuck out on that first hexagram. And then moving to work on what has been spoiled, again, a bowl in whose contents worms are breeding. Like, ugh, this is like nasty, But here we are. It's nasty. It's nasty time. That, again, this is the third time I've gotten this hexagram in the last 10 or 15 days, 10 or 12 days maybe. So it's been a theme that I've already been kind of chewing on. Work on what has been spoiled is fascinating because, as it says itself, it's not just describing a spoiled situation, it's describing the process of working it so that we can clean it up and purify. Like, we don't want to eat out of a bowl that's got rotten stuff and worms. We got to throw that in the compost. We got to like scrub the bowl out. We have to like prepare things and clean things up before we can really utilize that again in a healthy, reasonable way. And that's what this hexagram is saying. It's saying like, yep, this is rotten, and time to do the work. Time to do the work of cleaning it up. And I don't know if I pay too much attention to politics and current affairs, but I pay a fair amount. And I hope I can be forgiven for thinking of the dominant kind of social, cultural / two-party system in America as being, in a way, somewhat interestingly reflected in these lines. So it's this idea of decay. The decay has come about because the gentle indifference of the lower trigram, the wind, the gentle, has come together with the rigid inertia of the upper, the mountain, keeping still. That's what the top three lines changed to when the fifth line changed. So the gentle indifference of the lower trigram has come together with the rigid inertia of the upper, and the result is stagnation. Yeah. But again, work on what has been spoiled has supreme success. It furthers one to cross the great water. The great water, crossing the great water is like, an ambitious undertaking. You don't want to do that unless you've got all hands on deck and a plan and the right gear and the weather's good and, the whole thing seems likely not to drown everybody, by doing it halfway. And this is encouraging that. It's time to work on that supreme success. It furthers one to cross the great water. But again, before the starting point 3 days, after the starting point 3 days, like really being circumspect. But I love this idea, but what's been spoiled by humans' fault can be made good again through humans' work. It's like, yep, truth, you know? It's not immutable fate that's caused the state of corruption, but rather the abuse of human freedom. Work towards improving conditions promise as well, because it accords with the possibilities of the time. This is another thing. The Ching is one of its consistent thematic messages that it's constantly underscoring is this idea that we are players within a broader context that is happening, that shapes and informs and sometimes bounds the limits of what is possible for us to achieve, where we can go, because circumstances are such that they sometimes favor certain, energy and sometimes favor other kinds of energy, and we can only buck that to a certain degree before we run into like, oh, this isn't really the time where whatever it is that I'm trying to do here is really favorably held. Then it makes it hard to really like advance on that thing. And so this idea of understanding what are the time conditions and how to live in harmony with that through, basically like taking action when it's time to take action, and, resting and going more internally. For example, when it's time to rest and go more internally, it's not about always doing any particular activity. It's about being in harmony with the kind of seasons and the time frame and what is being asked of us and invited from us. And what this is talking about is that it is a time, it accords with the time, the possibilities of the time, this idea of like making, improving conditions and doing the great work and crossing the great water. This is in harmony with this period of time. Like, this is not a time where it's saying, boy, just retreat to your corner and lick your wounds and, and don't take any action because anything could bring it. And it's not saying that. It's saying this is a good time to do the work. Success depends, however, on proper deliberation. This whole before the starting point, 3 days, after the starting point, 3 days, which again came in the other hexagram also. We must first know the causes of corruption before we can do away with them. Hence, it's necessary to be cautious in the time before the start. Then we must see to it that the new way is safely entered upon so that relapse may be avoided. Therefore, we must pay attention to the time after the start. Decisiveness and energy must take the place of the inertia and indifference that have led to decay, in order that the ending may be followed by a new beginning. Thus, the superior man stirs up the people and strengthens their spirit. Yeah, this part struck me also. When the wind blows low on the mountain, it's thrown back and spoils the vegetation. That just really seems like a little bit of a description of the current cultural spoilage. Because it's like this incredibly savage cutting edge of just the gnarliest duality and challenge and anger making, frustrating, blood curdling. You've got to be fucking kidding me. At one level, this is my experience. And then on the other level, how can I maintain, this is more that Nizargat like style. How can I maintain a ground in the non-dual acceptance of all phenomena as somehow being perfect and necessary and just fine kind of as it is, without that turning into sort of a spiritual bypass of like, oh no, everything's gonna be fine, oh, we must need this, we must, without somehow like breaking the brain through like not actually being able to feel the fullness of the heartbreak of the duality, like how to feel both of those fully without
Hmm.
without succumbing to the duality too brutally, but without numbing from it or talking myself into somehow being above it when actually my heart is being broken by it. Like, this is at the center of the existential challenge that I'm feeling, this week and in this time. Is it's been hard to hold the non-dual part because it's so obvious that so many people are going to get hurt, And the driving energy is just so sort of antithetical to so much of what I believe in and my hopes and dreams for, this beautiful idea that is a nation full of equal immigrants who can come and like make it work as long as they're willing to like put their shoulder to the grindstone and whatnot. And so it's a super challenging time um, for me, and yet I'm not really like a political activist by nature exactly. My activism, kind of takes a different form, I suppose. And so like I'm not that inclined to like whatever, somehow try to work it out in the political trenches directly myself. I recognize the value of voting in politics in a big way. I pay attention to it, but like it's not my way to try to move the needle that way. So I think I'm with you on the question because it's really hard to hold both of them, fully and cleanly without being somehow overwhelmed.